Hello, I'm Clayton Vance, and welcome to the Clayton Vance Podcast. This is where we discuss the art and soul of architecture and help explain why the world looks the way it does. Today, my guest is the Director of Architecture at the Utah Valley University School of Architecture, Paul Monson. Now, a little disclaimer here. We have been friends for near 20 years now. He was just ahead of me at school when we went to the University of Notre Dame School of Architecture a long time ago, studying traditional and classical. So we come from the same frame of reference. However, I will try to add some questions. But what we want to do is we're going to do a series of three different conversations. We're going to discuss the what, the why, and the how in terms of the educational challenge that we have in today's world, and the why it's important, and also the how, which is what the Utah Valley University School of Architecture is trying to do to make education accessible to a broader group of students that teach an alternative architecture from the majority of schools out there today. So it should be a great conversation. Paul, welcome.
Thank you, Clayton. And we'll just pretend that we've never met before. We don't go back 20 years. No. It's great to see you. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. So for everyone out there listening to this, Paul, just give us a quick little description on kind of your history. What interested you? When did you first get interested in architecture? And then how did you discover the University of Notre Dame and then your life since then?
It's a long story. I'll give the short version of it. And then if you want to ask some follow-up questions, if I leave things out or if I go on too long about things, I'm not sure how much people are really that interested in my history, my personal life. But I mean, I go back to like when I was a kid, I was always into drawing and design, but also math and science. I liked both the right and left brain types of subjects in school. I loved art. At some point, my story has to include Japan. So I served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Japan, lived for 2 years in rural northern Japan. And, if you went back and interviewed that 20-year-old Paul in Japan and asked him about the architecture, he wouldn't be able to articulate anything because I hadn't studied architecture, but it was all subconscious. Like the way that the Japanese just approach craft and their built environment with so much care and connection to nature really inspired me. I mean, now looking back, I've studied architecture and I have words for it. I can talk about the eaves, these like flying eaves of the roofs and the timber framing and the tatami and the sounds and the smells and the gardens and all that I was just downloading subconsciously, I think, at that point in my life. But I came back. I went to BYU. BYU didn't have an architecture program at the time, still doesn't. I wish it did, but I studied Japanese. And I was this close. I got accepted to Columbia's PhD program in Japanese language and literature and almost became a professor of Japanese. But I married a very non-Japanese woman who was not interested in that life. So that was the end of that. But I had friends and family in Chicago that did construction and gave me a job working $10 an hour, rehabbing houses in Oak Park.
For anyone who doesn't know what Oak Park is,
yeah,
what's the significance of Oak Park?
Oak Park is architectural mecca for the United States. It was the home and studio of Frank Lloyd Wright. And I actually got a job in a stained glass studio, building stained glass windows, and did some repairs on homes in Oak Park. So that was really cool. But I realized that I wasn't a good designer and I needed more training there, as well as the things I was building it was the architects that got to make the fun decisions. So I was like, okay, maybe I need to study architecture. And that's what led me to look for a master's degree at Notre Dame.
What sort of self-awareness does it take to realize, oh, I'm actually not that good? Because you can be in the field, you're developing a craft. You can develop a skill and get very, very skilled, but in all reality, have very little talent in terms of being able to execute beautifully crafted designs, even though you might have skill. And so you were practicing a skill and getting better at a skill. So what sort of, how did you have that self-awareness to know that you weren't as good as you could be?
At that point in my life, it was really just intuitive. Like I could see it, but I couldn't really do it. I made these stained glass lamps for family and friends, and I just like wasn't happy with them. They weren't that good, and I could see amazing, Tiffany lamps and the light fixtures that Frank Lloyd Wright made. And in some ways, Frank Lloyd Wright was an inspiration for me. I have very mixed feelings about him as a designer and as a human being, and have fallen much more in love with Bernard Maybeck, who was West Coast designer the same time period, but was a really delightful, wonderful family man and human being, and I think a better designer in a lot of ways than Frank Lloyd Wright. But yeah, I knew that I knew what I could be. I could see like how beautiful things could be when they're designed well, and thinking about like just the attention to detail and Japanese culture, and like I knew that I wanted to reach this horizon that was out there, but didn't know how to get there. So I applied to a bunch of different grad schools. I visited a lot of schools. I went all over the country to find the right grad school. And I wasn't even sure if I wanted to do architecture, actually. I applied to law schools at the same time. And if I had gotten into Harvard Law School, I wouldn't be here. I'd be in some law office somewhere. But as fate had it, I didn't get into Harvard. I got into my second tier law schools. I didn't want to go there. And I found out about Notre Dame through a friend of mine, Brad Houston, who recommended a great book called Suburban Nation that I read. And I was like, this is like a completely different conception of the world that I'd never thought about before, and went to Notre Dame, and kind of as a skeptic, actually. I wasn't really fully on board yet with classical architecture, because all of my education in high school was in modernism, art classes and stuff. That was the way I saw the world. So the education I got at Notre Dame was quite shocking. It made me rethink everything that I had believed about the world until that point.
So you get there. So education. That's what I want to discuss in this one, is the issues of education, what education is, what it means, and all that type of stuff. If you go to the etymology of education, there's educare and also educere, I believe, and one means to train, to mold, and the other one means to kind of lead or draw out, forth or draw out. And it was always in the context of children and or animals back in the day before like 1600. And then as we have it now, when we talk about education, it's almost like this super formulaic, go do this, put X, Y, Z into the equation, and then it pops out whatever we've got. What were some of those early questions? What were some of the early questions that you were presented with at the beginning of your studies at the University of Notre Dame that really transformed how you thought about the world?
Okay, so the word I'm going to use is beauty, and that's a very loaded term, and it's a term that before I got to Notre Dame, I had only heard used really in art as in the phrase "the beauty is in the eye of the beholder." It's a subjective thing. It can't be measured, and it's just what you like. It's just personal preference, really. And the way that I was taught about art in high school and art history was that the most important value in art is novelty and innovation and originality, and just do it like from your own voice that like has nothing to do with the past.
Okay.
So I got to Notre Dame, and I think it was like the first day, my professor, David Mayernick, said that beauty is an objective truth that leads us to the divine. And I was like, what? that that was a completely different conception of beauty, and led me on a path to try and figure out what he's even talking about.
Okay.
Which goes back to ancient Greece, and we can talk about how they saw beauty. It really has to do with the training of people, the training of minds, and the idea that we're striving to return back to a kind of wholeness or oneness with the divine, and beauty lifts us to a higher realm. And so if things are designed in a way that is in harmony with eternal truths, with timeless things, then it will naturally like kind of wake us up out of this mundane world. So that was a really big one for me. And also just seeing the work of students, seeing the work that Notre Dame students could do, how they could draw and watercolor and create these beautiful images, was very inspiring, and made me think like I can do this. If other students are doing this, I know like masters in the past have done it, but like kids my age are doing this too. They're learning how to do it. So maybe it's possible. And that was really the beginning for me when I got to Notre Dame. But it was a rocky road. I didn't succeed all the time in my early classes or in my early attempts at design. It was difficult.
I want to. We're going to deviate for a second. We got to talk about some of these stories.
Yeah.
What was difficult, what was not. But I have my own story about David Mayernick. So a big shout out to David Mayernick, wherever you are these days. I'm assuming you're still at University of Notre Dame, but the exact same thing happened to me. And so he did. It was a different context, different. So we'd gone through our first 3-week already intro to architecture before we got into school, into the semester, and he sat us all down, and rather than saying that direct thing, he presented the question. He's like, is beauty in the eye of the beholder? And I'd always, once again, heard it in the exact same context. Beauty is I've only heard it as a statement. I never heard it as a question. And when it was first presented as a question, that to me was the beginning of my education, to draw forth, to lead out, to nurture, to train, right? And and all of a sudden, when someone gave me the opportunity to question the premise, that opened up the entire world of questioning like everything.
Yeah, that resonates with me too. It's a good question to consider.
Yeah. So failures at the beginning of grad school. Do you have any funny stories or good stories that you're like, oh man, I could have gone back and done that second time?
I learned quickly that design is not just following a step-by-step set of instructions, that there's a lot of artistic freedom in design, and I didn't like that. The side of my brain that's very logical and wants like clarity and a linear point A to point B process was frustrated at first. I was in the first class of the 3-year program at Notre Dame, and we were mixed with 2-year students who already had a whole degree in architecture, and some of them had already a full degree from Notre Dame. So they'd already learned how to watercolor and do all these beautiful drawings. We were put in the same class over the summer, and then asked to draft this 4-columned portico and do a watercolor rendering of it and put them up on the wall, and they were judged, and they picked the best one. And I had always like been the top of my class in school. School for me was like a game that I was really good at. I'd figured out the rules to always get the best grade and always get like 100% on everything. And I was really proud of that. And to not get picked as the best. Like that first summer, man, that was like a big wound to my ego. And I wanted it to be a list of instructions. This is exactly what you do to get this perfect outcome. And they were saying things in the jury that they had never talked about. Like, you never told us that, how to do this, like reflected light and these things. And I had some errors in my drawing. And so that was a first motivation to me to really like get serious about this, and that it wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be just like my half effort could win first prize every time. I would really have to study hard and work hard, and this is going to be a long road to figure out how to do this.
So, early mentors, University of Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Who are they, and what sort of impact do they have on you? What did they teach you?
I had a lot of great professors and mentors at Notre Dame. David Mayer, Nicholas Warren, Richard Economakis, Stephen Sems, Michael Lykoudis, Norman Crow. These are a few of the teachers that I had there. Michael Lykoudis was the dean, and I've never seen anyone work so hard in my life. That man just like never left. He was always working hard. And all of my teachers, they were really inspiring. Phil Bess was the director of the graduate program and taught the urbanism classes. There was a guy named Bill Westfall that taught the treatises, and we read Vitruvius with him, and he's just a brilliant scholar. A lot of things were completely new to me, just new ideas, and I felt very overwhelmed a lot of the time. It was completely changing my worldview that I had brought with me, and I really appreciated how patient they were with me. I actually didn't make it in my first attempt at applying to Notre Dame. I got put on the wait list because a lot of the stuff that I submitted was like weird avant-garde, like modern art. That's what I was.
Exact same reason I got put on the wait list.
Like that's what I was told in high school was what you're supposed to do. So that's what I did. But I did have some drawings in my portfolio that were like, I could do hyper-realism. I could draw. I mean, I've always been able to draw. So I could draw figures. I could draw people and landscapes. And so they saw those, and I guess they gave me the benefit of the doubt, for which I'll always be grateful, because literally everything positive in my career I owe to that education at Notre Dame. Every step of my career has been because of that.
Well, broaden that beyond career and related to education in a way. What I'm getting at is the breadth of education and how you are educated begins to influence how you see the world, right? And so it becomes a new paradigm or frame of reference in which you just evaluate the institutions, your built environment, the interactions you have with people, et cetera, and that how did that education at Notre Dame, particularly from what they were teaching, a classical architectural framework, how did that begin to like flow into other aspects of how you saw the world and not just your career?
Shit. I'm going to share a quote. I have a sheet of quotes here that I reference a lot because they've been helpful to me in just stating things very succinctly. One of my heroes in education is a guy from Japan. His name is Shinichi Suzuki. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Suzuki method of music education. So my family is a very musical family. Both of my parents were big influences on me. They're both musicians. My mother's a violinist. My father's a classical musician, but a professor of music. And Suzuki said, if a baby is brought up listening to a recording of a song out of tune, his ears will become accustomed to it, and it will be very hard for him to change later on. And to me, that's like a perfect analogy for architecture and our built environment around us. And we live in such a culture of noise and distraction and ugly things. And I grew up in suburbia, Michigan and Pennsylvania. Our neighborhoods were sort of walkable, but they were pretty much suburban sprawl. And so and our family didn't have a lot of money with musicians for parents. So we didn't have really nice things. And classicism is the pursuit of perfection.
Is that how you define it, or where does that definition come from?
That's how I define it.
Where did you get that definition?
I'm sure I'm quoting somebody, but it's not arriving at perfection. It is this striving for something that's higher.
Perfection, that's pretty loaded. And the idea of perfection is a whole thing that we could go off on, and whether that's even achievable, and what that even means. But sorry, go on.
Yeah, but it's the pursuit of it. Mm-hmm. Is it achievable? Maybe, I don't know. Maybe not. It's a concept of aspiration, and so I think that's what Notre Dame was opening my eyes to. More than just a career. I mean, it really launched my career, but in how I saw the world, that there are objectively beautiful things, really finely crafted things that set a standard as classics, just the height of human achievement. And I think of that in all cultures. I'm not just talking about Greek and Roman cultures. Like I mentioned Japan. Mm-hmm. Japan has a classical period that historians talk about. Every culture does. It has like the period of history, I don't know, you could call it a golden age, where poetry and art and theater and architecture and music and all of these things reached a kind of refinement. And I had an understanding of what that sounded like in music, because growing up I had to take piano lessons, and I understood the history of music. But art and architecture seemed like there was this break in the 20th century before I was born at some point that like canceled all of history. And now we were supposed to start over and start from scratch and forget about all that stuff in the past. But at Notre Dame, it was really taking the past seriously, and not just as history, but as precedents that you could learn from and emulate in modern practice and modern architecture. That was possible was radical to me, to even think that was a possibility. And then to try it and realize how hard it is, because it seems like it should be easy. It's just copying stuff, but no, it's not copying things. It's like creating paneling on the wall. You have to know geometry, you have to know carpentry, you have to know balance and proportion and all of these principles of design so that it's beautiful. Because it can be a bad copy. It can be a really ugly version, or a kind of superficial or weak version of something from history, or it can be really authentic and beautiful. And I was starting to see the difference between those things.
What was the first building you saw, or some of the buildings you saw where you had to critically evaluate them, that began to help you on this realization, like, oh my gosh, yeah, that building, well, okay, yep, that's beautiful. And that building is, no, that's not beautiful.
Michael Ikutis, who was the dean of Notre Dame at the time, was really generous to me. He let me lead a group of students to Japan on study abroad.
Really?
Like,
that is generous.
I know. He was like, all right, I want to go to Japan. Norm Crow wants to go to Japan. We know Frank Ching. He wants to go to Japan with us. And we've got a bunch of students who want to go. Like, so can you take us, Paul? And I went. There was another grad student who was from Japan. The two of us led this tour to Japan. I went to Takayama and Shirakawa and Tokyo and Kyoto and Nara. And it was amazing. And we went to Tokyo, and there are some colonial Western buildings in Tokyo, some like classical buildings that are more modern and kind of like when you see a classical building that's not the height of what classical buildings can do, it's like sort of a copy. I couldn't see the difference. And Frank Ching, who was not at Notre Dame, he was at the University of Washington.
Yeah, and who's Frank Ching?
Frank Ching is an author. He's like the most influential artist and author of books about architecture. And we got to just travel around Japan and
awesome.
Draw and sketch.
And he was also Notre Dame grad back in the day, like
yes,
in the 60s or something.
It was a classical program.
Yeah.
Anyway, but he's not a classical architect. He's an artist and a very gifted illustrator and educator. We were looking at this building, and I just took it for granted at that point that, oh, if it's a classical building, it's a good building. And Frank Ching was picking it apart, oh, this looks fake, and look at that. That's really there's no depth, and the materials are ugly, and the proportions are off. And I was like, oh man, I thought I knew it. I thought I had figured out the world, that everything classical is beautiful, but no, actually, there's a lot of beautiful things within the classical tradition, and there's a lot of fake things. And you can probably say the same thing about modernism. There's some modernism that I find really just exquisite and inspiring, and others. Most of what we see is the banal kind of everyday, just copies of copies, and it's a consumerism, corporate architecture that's so soul crushingly ugly, and just so that was one experience. I went to the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., and stood in the rotunda, the reading room, and just started crying. It's I'm going to get emotional right now, thinking about that space.
It's this is possible.
Seeing, the sculptures.
Yeah.
All of these great thinkers and authors, looking down at you, thinking about the breadth of human history and the founding of this country and its principles, and Jefferson, the building of that library, and man, that space transformed me. The Pantheon in Rome. There's some iconic spaces that really moved me.
And so these things, they're spaces that move you, which objectively, in all reality, move everyone. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from. You really do have to be completely desensitized to all visual kind of inputs to not go into this space. You have to have been fed a diet of just garbage your entire life in terms of architectural garbage. It's like if all you've ever eaten is McDonald's and Burger King your entire life, and then you go to Ruth's Chris and you actually have a steak, and you're like, oh man, I wish this McDonald's was better. It's weird when you're discussing these things, because there's a propensity to elitism when you have this specialized knowledge. But the crazy thing is, the same thing exists in modernist architecture. Honestly, to a more specific or specialized degree, because it's so subjective rather than classicism, and how that knowledge is transmitted, and also it's more, how do I say this? It's more in the ether, whereas the transmission of knowledge within classical architecture or traditional architecture, that seems to be a little bit more accessible because of how many books, how many examples, how much stuff. When it comes to this transmission, you have these experiences. For what we're talking about now, for everyone who's listening, we're trying to make this accessible, and we're using a whole bunch of words right now, which can honestly seem like a jargon and a little esoteric. Like, you guys sound like a bunch of pompous whatever, trying to talk about classicism, architecture, this, that, and the other, whatever. And I totally get it, because, Paul talked about how he grew up in suburbia. I also grew up in suburbia. But what's interesting about both of our growings up, my dad played the cello, my mom played the violin also, and so we both and they listened to classical music, and that's, I wasn't necessarily raised on classical music, but I was never raised on pop music, because my parents didn't ever listen to it, and so it was unfamiliar, and so I got just very suburban, split level. This is what we do, and I had and McDonald's and Tang and that mac and cheese, and so when I went to school, also I thought the exact same thing. It's like, classicism is anything that's good. Little did I knew nothing, and fortunately I was so eager to learn, and I had no ego at the time. I just wanted to be the best, that everyone just kind of made fun of me the whole time, which was totally good. and my lack of exposure to of everything, growing up in suburban U.S.
Yeah, and I want to be clear, like, I don't judge other people. It's like the same in your personal choices in your life. Like, I'm not judging other people and what they like. I'm speaking from my own experience, and how I was able to see the world with new eyes when I learned more about history and about principles of good design that are universal, really. I would say that classicism is what comes naturally to us.
Yeah.
The classical, you could also use words like traditional. There's a broad range. Classical is maybe like the peak of the mountain and of this tradition. But there's a lot of buildings that are not at that like height of refinement that I also find really amazing and beautiful. A lot of vernacular architecture, things that people have built in traditional cultures that are just connected to that place and the history and context and tradition of a certain place, wherever that is. Is it Japan or Macedonia or Africa or wherever? Like, every culture has a context and has materials that if you're building with in a natural way, that just comes from connection to the environment and stewardship over the environment that traditional cultures have always had, because they didn't really have the choice not to. They didn't have the machines and technology of modernism, so they were building in harmony with nature. It's very human. It's what connects with us as human beings. And that's really the foundation of classicism to me. So there's a Western Greco-Roman version of it that has very iconic elements of the classical orders of the Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, and all of these elements of the entablatures and things that we use our culture, because that's what was transmitted from Greece and Rome to England to the founding fathers, and from Virginia and New York across the country to now we're here in Utah, and we use the same moldings and the same classical orders because they embody those principles of nature, not because they are somehow like true.
Yeah, and if they do embody the principles of nature, they're going to be more true than less true.
Yeah, but they could be other things.
But yeah, there's an infinite variety in terms of the expression of those things, and so well,
the principles are true.
Yeah, the principles are true,
and the order, like the Corinthian capital, is beautiful because it embodies those true principles of taking geometry and sculpture and fusing it together into this really refined and beautiful example of all of these principles of harmony and balance and line and composition and things that are really difficult to achieve if you're starting from a blank piece of paper. So it's smart to take something that centuries of human creativity have already come up with and maybe add your little take on it, just like a recipe in cooking. Like if you just start with a blank sheet of paper, I'm going to take all these ingredients in the kitchen I've never made anything before and come up with a great dish, you're going to have less chance for success than if you take this great recipe that my mom used and her mom and all my family back generations have used, and maybe I'm going to add this little new thing to change it, right? And that's going to make it my own.
And this, by the way, is why I'm not allowed in the kitchen. Bonnie owns our kitchen. I'm not allowed in it because I screw everything up.
I love cooking, but I'm always on the edge. It's like you look at a recipe and then like I don't want to do it exactly like that. I'm going to like change it my way a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to like invent new ingredients.
So, but this is the perfect way to actually conclude this particular episode. Because what we're talking about right now is the what. And also, just as a by the way, is both Paul and I, when we went to the University of Notre Dame, none of us knew any of the stuff that we're talking about right now. None of it. Right. And so there had to be a transmission of knowledge from people who had also received a transmission of knowledge or discovered knowledge which had been discovered. And that type of thing, when you go back and you read Vitruvius, he continues to reference the past.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. And so he talks about the ancients, and the ancients did it great. And when you look at the transmission of knowledge from era to era to era, when you go into the Louvre, when you go into these museums that have sculptures from the Hellenistic or height of the Greek era, they're just better than everyone else's. There's something about that level of just simple beauty and elegance that it's refined and reposed, and it like you just sit there, you're like, wow, there's something about that.
Yeah, and maybe to even like use some other words when you say that it's better than what others could do. They had a command of the human figure, understanding the anatomy of the human body and expression that could make something almost come alive, something that's carved in stone, feel very lifelike. And other cultures, their sculptures were more stylized and stiff. Like there are a lot of cultures that did amazing sculpture and architecture. The Greeks, one of the tragedies of history is that we don't have more books from the ancient period on architecture. There's little pieces from Cicero and other writers, but the only really the earliest surviving treatise we have is Vitruvius.
Yeah.
The Romans learned almost everything that they knew about architecture from the Greeks and the Etruscans. The Romans were like...
They were the first copiers. They just copied. They copied the gods. They copied the architecture. It's like they didn't come up with anything original. They're just copiers.
Yeah, they were really efficient culture of conquering other people and taking what was best from their cultures.
Yeah.
Once they conquered the Greeks and took their architecture and art, it was never the same. Romans spoke Greek, like the emperors spoke Greek. That was the refined language and culture. It's just sad that we don't have the surviving texts from Greek architects. So we have Vitruvius, who is looking back to the Greeks, who were looking back to the Egyptians and others before them.
Yeah.
Who were all looking to nature.
Yeah.
All of these cultures were learning from nature. And if they built in harmony with nature in a durable, timeless way, then it survived, and it still inspires us today.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's how
that's it.
we can think about it.
Yeah.
Or one way to think about it anyway. That's how I came to see the Romans and the Greeks, not as like, okay, these are people who are infallible and always built things perfectly, because they didn't. And they had horrible things in their culture that we would find immoral. And I'm not emulating any of those things. I think we can separate what was good, what was timeless, what was true from their cultures, and try to solve modern problems, which is what we're doing at UVU. Looking to the past to solve modern problems.
That's exactly it. The problems with architecture, and what we're trying to accomplish with the transmission of knowledge, which is why this podcast why I'm even doing this in the first place. We want to explore the art and soul of architecture and explain why the world looks the way it does. Well, from this particular episode, we talked about just the importance of education. Really, what we did is just couch it in the idea of the story of how Paul Monson learned through that transmission of knowledge of people who received knowledge, how to actually begin to do beautiful, objectively beautiful architecture and work. And it's that transmission that needs to continue over and over and over again. And we look to the past to see what was good, true, beautiful, adopt those, and implement those. So thank you for joining us on the first of 3 episodes with Paul Monson about the what, why, and how of traditional architecture at UVU and what we're doing. So thanks for joining us. Join us next time, and we'll see you.